Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start. Can I ask everybody to take their seats? And we can start right away. Welcome to the Parallel Team B, which is called Multiscale Ecosystem of Research Infrastructures. My name is Ondřej HRADIL, and except being the ICRI organizer, the man behind the stage of this week, I work at the Masaryk University at the rectorate, so that means at the central level, and I'm in charge of all the research infrastructures that we operate within the university. I'm definitely not operating all of them. My background is business and economics, and we have much better people to operate structural biology, nanotechnologies, clinical trials, and other facilities that we have at the university. Currently, we have 13 national level research infrastructures that we are engaged as Masaryk University. 4 of them are coordinated by the university. We have a number of engagements on the European level with the S3 infrastructures. I see Jacques DEMOTES, so we are members of ECRINERIC, the clinical trials one. We are strong Instruct Center for Structural Biology. We are one of the nodes of Eurobioimaging. We are engaged in Elixir, mainly biomedical sciences, but also social sciences. We are part of GGP, for example. Also environment / health and food. You will hear Jana Klánova this afternoon. Yesterday evening there was a site event opening of the biobank of Recetox / Irene, which is a new S3 level research infrastructure, the second one coordinated on the European level from the Czech Republic. We have colleagues from Eli, they were the first. We are the second, but still not bad. Prague is the capital, Brno is the second city in the country, not bad. Okay, introducing the Parallel Teams concept. The Parallel Team B is called Multiscale Ecosystem of Research Infrastructures, as I said, and all the Parallel Teams are having 3 sections. So the logic would say, please stay here for the whole afternoon, but I will not force you. So there are 3 independent sections, so feel free to move between the rooms. But if you find the topic of the ecosystem, the big ones, the small ones, the middle ones, cooperation, not just across the research infrastructures, but across the continents, please stay here in this room. The topic, multiscale ecosystem of research infrastructures, actually I was the one suggesting this topic to the program committee of ICRI, because as I said, we as the university are engaged in a number of research infrastructures, and basically in all the fields that I mentioned, life sciences, environment, by definition, most of the infrastructures are distributed. So it's, well, bunch of smaller scale infrastructures grouped together to make a bigger role in the environment. And I think it's an important topic to discuss because historically, the mankind develops, scientific disciplines develop, research infrastructures develop. Some subjects like physics, astrophysics, or particle physics, they need big toys. They need a lot of money. Other subjects like biology, 30 years ago, did not need such a big machines and so much money to buy them. These days, it's changing. And we need to speak about the ecosystem because even in physics, when you say lasers, we have the big lasers just outside of Prague. Beautiful, big, nice for politicians to open it. But you can play with the lasers on very small scale on benchtop lasers. And we are going to give examples of these various kinds of infrastructures, how they interplay, how they cooperate together. And the big topic of today, how to foster this engagement, this cooperation, and not only between the big ones and small ones within a single discipline, which is basically a topic of the first section, but also between the continents, between the different geographies, which is the second section, which will be moderated by my distinguished colleague Alejandro Busquiato from Uruguay. And during the third session, we thought, okay, it's always useful to bring back home something inspirational, maybe something which is easy to do or easy to implement. So we called it Toolbox session. So in that session, the idea is to have quick presentations to catch your attention on a couple of subjects like governance, networking, training, education, and career paths, and then have split the group into several discussion corners and have a bit more in-depth discussion in small groups, not a whole bunch here. So that's the idea behind the session. Until 6 o'clock. At 6, you have 1 hour to refresh, and the social event is starting at 7 at Besed Nidu, which is just next doors to the International Hotel. So now I have the privilege to welcome my great speakers. Julia is the first kid on the block. Maybe if you just stand up shortly so that people can see you. Julia is president of Core Technologies for Life Sciences. She comes from Spain, but she works in Sweden at Sahlgrenska in Göteborg, running her microscopy facility there. And she is the president of CTLS, which is a grouping of individuals who want to push the profession forward, the profession of people working in the life sciences core facilities. The second one is Rodrigo, Portugal, coming over from Brazil. And he's the head of Cryo-EM facility. Another continent, another speaker. We have Obed Ogega from the African Academy of Sciences based in Kenya. So finding out how it works, it will be possibly a very different picture from Europe, Latin America, Africa, but same field, research infrastructures. Jacques, the Director General of the European Clinical Research Infrastructure Network called ECRINERIC from France. And we have one remote speaker joining us from the US. So it's Louise Willingale. If hopefully we can have her for a second on the screen. Perfect. Hello to the US. It's early morning in the US, I guess. So nice to have you here. So without much further ado, I give the floor to Julia. We will have altogether, now we have no more 90 minutes, but we have 75 minutes for the session. So we finish on time, not to steal from lunch. So if you can manage within 10 minutes, it will be challenging and it will be good. Please, the floor is yours. And if you have questions, please do ask with the conference app or online just below the stream, and I will see the sections on my tablet and ask on your behalf. Julia.
Thank you. Thank you, Audrey, and thank you, the organizers, for giving me this the time and this space, even 10, 15 minutes. Let's see how we do. We normally have tendency to do very long. Anyway, as you see here, I use now the terminology core facilities, and I write that is the hub for excellent research and innovation. I think we have heard that a lot, and research infrastructures. I bring out the core facilities. I started to work in the core facility more than 20 years ago, when the whole discussion about core facilities started. And after the post-genomic era, where there was needed to have facilities that help in the researchers. It was a tough time. Not easy in Sweden neither to convince people that you need to run expensive machines and to have experts there, especially when, as he said, and in Sahlgrenska Academy, this is a medical faculty. It's not so easy to convince clinicians that you need microscopes for doing research, and sometimes basic research. As well as he said, I'm the president of Core Technologies for Life Science, and in my talk, I'm going to mix a little bit of both. As I said, and Audrey told me I need to explain why I use the concept of core facilities. Definitely, I always think this is definitely the way to sustain and develop a global cooperation. Because this session is talk about collaboration and cooperation. Well, we do that every day. This is part of our job from the very beginning. We collaborate locally, we collaborate with our users, we collaborate regional with the industry, with other colleagues that are working in other facilities, we collaborate nationally, we collaborate internationally and globally. And that's the important thing, that's the environment. And from the background as cell molecular biologist, and I like the word ecosystems. If I come back to when I was studying biology and I was studying ecology, ecosystems, this integration of these functional groups that they can work by themselves in a big landscape. And this is exactly what we do in the core facilities. And the good thing in a core facility, if you want to call research infrastructure, it's okay with me, but I like the core because it's actually the core of the that help in an institution. We are actually already, as I say, collaborators, and we are collaborators that we don't say no. As a researchers, you go with a collaborator from Europe to States, and they tell you, no, sorry, I cannot collaborate with you. I don't want to collaborate with you. In our case, this is our job, to collaborate and to help our researchers, and we will only say no if it's not technically feasible. And we have to keep that in mind, because that's the reality. And I think that's the important, and that's actually what I like it to work in a core facility. Because I can say yes, and I normally say yes to everything. The main mission is, of course, we provide expert service and consultation beyond what any research laboratory can do. But we fulfill many more things. We are an independent. You told me I have to explain the concept. That's what I'm doing right now. We are an independent entity. We are not attached. And I take the liberty to use my own facility, the one I'm heading in Sweden. I'm not an executive in the top, I'm not a policymaker, and explain you from inside out what is a core facility. It's a sufficient large that we can actually strategically and be flexible. I'm writing grants as any other PI. I need to do that because my institutional subvention is not enough. I need to get money from other external grants and from other also European grants. Any scientist can use our technologies, means industry, people that are working in other faculties, in other universities, in Sweden, and outside Sweden or globally. We have users from Canada, from the States, from China. And that is what I mean with broad open access policy. And we were like that 20 years ago. We were the first facility in Sweden that we were open access. The majority of the facilities at that time, it was facilities inside departments, that they were not independent. They don't have the flexibility to actually work because, and do things. I have had many colleagues, managers, and heads that was working in those facilities were really, really tough to try to do anything and improve their, of course, one of the main problems as well is the combination of the funding. Of course, we have user fees, we have external grants, we have internal grants. That's great, that's give me freedom, but it's also a lot of stress. Because if the external grant go, part of my staff had to go, and that's a problem. And this is a problem we're facing all, not only the large ones, but definitely the medium and the small ones. In a way, when we're sitting together, we did not have to talk about large, medium, and small, because we all have actually the same problems, maybe different scales. I'm not asking for billions of euros. I would like millions of euros. But maybe I don't need that amount to actually keep the facility up and running and motivate and keep the staff. We are essential because sometimes we're the only mean to actually do cutting edge, because we have this cutting edge technology. And more important, I will say in the end, we actually, of course, we can offer in services and enable discoveries. We can do development technologies. We develop technologies. We are scientists. We are not technical labs people. We are scientists. The group, my group is 9 people, counting me, and we are all PhDs with different backgrounds, physics, chemistry, biology, and biotechnology. Innovation, because we are hub for innovation, not only because we are super smart, but we have the users with the high-end questions, and we need to actually help them to make it reality. And of course, we think that we have the tools to address the social challenges that we have been discussing all over the time, climate change or healthcare problem, precision medicine, that's definitely something. And something very important, the staff. I think that's the most important part of the facility. You can have a bunch of microscopes, a bunch of technology. If you don't have the people to run that technology, that will not work. And we have to, one of the important things of these people is that they actually understand the users. We actually understand them when they come to us and they ask for help. And we know what we have to do. We push in the technology. Thank you to them all together. They feel actually pride for making these users successful. I get so happy when I hear that one of my users got a science paper or got a nature paper. I'm not in that paper. I acknowledge, my facilities acknowledge. But I know that behind that paper, it was a lot of work done for the people sitting there. And this is the key to sustain the core facility. Yes, we need money, but we need them too. If you don't have them, I can give €1 billion to buy microscopes, and that's it. And what happened with the people? And many times the funding agencies will only give us money for the machines, but not for people. It's very difficult, as you say, Audrey, the politicians like to cut the big titans, and where is the guy who will run the facility, the titan? This is what we need, and what Rodrigo and me, we were just discussing about. I put now, as I said, as a liberty in my facility as an example. We are in the core. We do access training, networking, innovation, sharing. Yeah. And we are not alone, obviously. We are part of a national infrastructure. Now the landscape is much bigger, and this is another ecosystem now that is nationally. We are also into the Nordic microscopy infrastructure that we have created, another step. And finally, we are also part of the Eurobioimaging. As you see, we are at the core, and from that core, you are extending in different ways. And this is the people behind all this instrumentation. But we are beyond that. We bring visibility and attractiveness. We help to recruit, and this is very important, to recruit young scientists. The first thing that young scientists and UPI are asking is, do you have core facilities? And if you don't have, forget it. They will not come. Meeting point for scientists, staff members, as I say, we are technological mentors. And we are important as well for funding, for helping the researchers actually to get the funding. And of course, we are in an optimal position to discuss and improve technological. Central to the success, as we have discussed, is the integration, the joint force of the core facilities. We have to do a teamwork with all the core facilities, combine the technologies, and we cross-facility workflows, and that's what we do. As I told you, all these big circles around the facility, but we also have to create alliance across institutions. If I continue putting Sweden as and my facility, now we are 5 facilities that forming a distributed, coordinated by one hub that is in Stockholm. But we are beyond than that, we are. And now you see that ecosystems, there are many of them, but into one big landscape. Love again the ecosystems, and the ecosystems have ecosystems into the ecosystems. If I continue, but we have challenge. And now we have challenge, as we have discussed yesterday, in maintaining. We need a long-term stability for the facility. We need to be recognized, because still they are not properly recognized. And if we are not properly recognized, it's very difficult to ask for anything. And we need a proper career path for a facility. That's where the core technologies for life science came. This is actually a association that was actually, as an initiative, was created more than 10 years ago, where all the people we have for different technologies, not only microscopy, we thought that we have the same challenge, we have the same problems. We need to sit together, we need to discuss with each other, and we need to try to see if we can advocate for the core facilities. This is where the network got. This is a non-profit organization that we try to help our facility people. And we think that that's actually the road to empower the facilities. We are around the world. It's not only Europe, even so that the majority of our members is in Europe. All these institutions are behind. And we are here and helping our facilities by creating this brainstorming knowledge place we have. How we do that? We have webinars, we have courses for professional development, we have shadowing programs that we helping the facilities managers if they want to move from one facility to another and educate the new scientists of the future. This is the happy people. When we have in Ghent in 2018, 2020 we have to cancel, 2021 we did in Lisbon online, and you are invited to the one in Dublin if you want to know more than what we do and advocate for core facilities. Thank you, Audrey, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Julia. Julia is always very energetic proponent of core facilities. So we heard the European case. And now let's move to South America. And Rodrigo will tell us his story.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I will talk a bit about our context of Cryo-EM in Brazil. Just a bit of context, how I see this scenario. I'm the head of Cryo-EM facility in Brazil, also the vice president for life science for the Brazilian Society of Microscopy and Microanalysis. And LNNano has the first Cryo-EM infrastructure for material science and structural biology in Latin America. And this is inserted in a major EM facility, also for material sciences. That is probably one of the largest ones in Latin America. So here is the campus. We have the synchrotron and 4 national laboratories. One of them is the one that LNNano has the electron microscopy. So open facilities are like part of our cornerstones in our mission, together with research, innovation, and education. And that's the infrastructure we have. Just to point out, it's a kind of, since we are the first and still kind of the only one in Cryo-EM for structural biology, we have to provide from like entry-level microscopy to high-end microscopy. So, and for the ones that are not familiar, okay. For the ones that are not familiar, Cryo-EM deals like from material science, like soft materials, like drug-loaded liposomes, to structural biology, protein and virus structures. So just a few numbers. The interesting thing here is that, like, if we check proposal and researchers, the numbers are more well balanced between life science and material science. But when you go for time allocation, you have much more time allocated to life science, and that reflects the fact that the projects are much more complex. So let's go now to the points that we would like to discuss. And first, like a bit of benefits and challenges of thinking about ecosystems. So what we want as an ecosystem for EM is that, like, we allow projects to flow between facilities. That's what we would like to have. But that's actually not the reality that we have if you just have like 1 or 2 facilities in the ecosystem, like what we now have. So it's clear that we have to have this different scale of facilities for supporting EM in a healthy ecosystem, what we would like to have there. And the funding should provide that. But actually, that's not most of the reality that we have in funding, in terms of considering the necessity of forming clusters and networks instead of only funding like single equipments. And in terms of Latin America, we also have to consider that heterogeneity is huge. So not only in terms of funding, but also in terms of infrastructure needs. So that all has to be in the equation, and that's what we've been experiencing in Brazil. So a bit of some specificities, for instance, accessing infrastructure. One of the challenges that we have is like time allocation. If we would like to say yes, as Julia said, to every proposal, but actually we do that for less than half of the proposals that we have. And that's because we don't have enough infrastructure. So, and then another thing that comes is that you also have to reserve some time, like time that you don't know what's going to happen, but it will happen. Like some projects will not happen the way you want, and you have to finish them. There will be some last-minute fast tracks that you have to attend, and you do that. But there was someone in the list that were not attending because you were put just some empty space in your agenda, and you have to do that. The other thing is the balance between groups' expertise. Like in our case, there are external committee that will rank the projects, so you just go to the projects and you invite, you allocate time for them. And if you check the list, the most experienced groups will be on the top of the list, and the less experienced groups will be in the bottom of the list. So how do you manage to have the less experienced groups getting experience if you don't support them? So ideally, they should have their own infrastructure to do that at home, close to the bench, but that's not the reality. So you have to come with different ways to do that. And that's what we're trying to do, also having this entry-level equipment and try to support them to evolve them. And actually, we have a few successful cases in that thing. Huge problem, funds for mobility. I mean, Brazil is a big country, Latin America is a big continent. You have to provide people the ways to move, or at least to ship samples. And as it was mentioned yesterday, in one of the sessions, customs can be a huge, huge problem in Latin America for shipping samples. User community is part of this ecosystem. In the case of Cryo-EM in Brazil, they were essential to start the project, not only to support, establish the technique, but also, as we did it together, they had time to prepare their labs to use the technique later on, like prepare postdocs, having people trained in the technique. And also, this allows us to have this idea of training people over the different labs. That's what we would like to have. Like if you have an entry-level lab with EM, that lab will be much more, in that lab will be much more easier to perform training of the students. You have more time of machine available. And on the other hand, in large-scale facilities, you have maybe more specific techniques or advanced techniques that you can train. So the ecosystem is also necessary for training because you allow people to train in different levels. And it will be good for the system since that people will be hired later on. So one of the problems that we are facing now is this, in Cryo-EM, there is a huge global career movement. People are just moving from place to place and new jobs appearing all the time. And you face that problem of like train people for 5 to 10 years and they just go, you know. It's not exactly brain drain, but we have to face that. We have to face that, and what we think is more and more we have to come up with ideas of do a creation of a critical mass of staff. It's not the model of train like one by one to hire that person and that person to stay in your lab like for decades. It's not going to happen. Or it's at least at this moment it's not happening. The other question Ondřej put was about complex and interdisciplinary questions. So I think the first thing that we have to think here is that you need a multi-scale sort of facilities and equipment to deal with that. And so funding schemes should provide that. We have a very good example just recently in the state of São Paulo. FAPESP put a multi-user equipment call for up to 3 million euros that included not only, you could ask for more than one equipment as far as you prove that there was a kind of pipeline or integrated infrastructure, and also support for technical staff and training. So that's the kind of thing that we should more and more thing. We should discuss clusters of equipments, and because that's what actually asks for complex questions. The role of small fundings are like very well welcome as far as you have a roadmap. Because if you have a roadmap, a good plan, you can use small funds to like fill the gaps or to put in the right place where you need it. Otherwise, it's kind of useless for this kind of initiative. And then it comes staff, as Julia mentioned. That's the key point of all of that. The career of the people in a core facility has to be acknowledged, like the value it has. We really have to make users and themselves understand that, you know, it's great to support and to like the final results, the science that is being done is actually had a huge responsibility of them. And so that means 5 minutes. Okay. So it was supposed to be 15, now it's 10, but okay. So the other thing that it's important in an ecosystem is like facilities not necessarily in a complex question. They will answer the question. They will give you some data. So the community has to be trained to use that and to use it properly. And they have to understand that. So for small scale, I'll just go quickly. Lack of funding, huge problem is lack of funding. There are ways that we can think about that, like if you have more than one equipment doing the same thing, and if you know where the equipment is, if one is breaking, you can go to another one. But again, you have to know they exist. And the other thing, we really need a more organic integration between facilities. How to do that? Normally, it's done by the users or the projects, but not really between facilities. Funding. Again, in Brazil, we have some good examples of funding networks. CNPEM, for instance, is the national system for nanotechnology. It's the one that we are part of, and actually good part of the equipment for Cryo-EM was part of this system, and this is a huge success. It organized laboratories in different levels, and the high-end level of laboratories, like the coordinator ones, are allowed to use grants to buy equipment to serve the community. Other examples, there are scientific networks like the National Institutes for Science and Technology, and also the CPITs, different initiatives, but also very important as networks examples. For small facilities, what we see is that they have to rely on many different grants. So you don't have really grants that can support them, so they have to combine, and it's very stressful. As for maintenance, we have some maintenance grants from time to time, federal ones, state ones, but still it is usually a very common problem all across the country. Going for the last slide. So how these ecosystems can contribute to integrate countries and in a worldwide scale. So I believe that, you know, the ultimate goal of a research infrastructure is science, and this is a collective effort. So it's quite clear that it works for that. The model for doing that, I think we should emphasize the need of like different levels, like local, regional, and large infrastructures, and how we could integrate them. I think the key question is, how can we integrate them? And in a way to provide this more like organic flow of people and projects, in a way we use them in this like different scales with different abilities. So, and with that, I thank you all for your time, and that's our team at LNNano. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Interesting to hear two microscopists from two different continents, but having basically a very similar message. Now we move over to Africa, and we switch from life sciences and microscopy to environment, because that's the background of Obed Ogega, coming from the Africa Academy of Sciences, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And I received the first, well, it's not a question, it's a comment in the questions from the online audience. We have 19 people online following the session. So please, if you do have questions or comments, put them into the chat so I can see them. And even people in the room, you will get your mic, but don't be afraid, or if you are too shy to speak up, just write your question into the chat. So Obed, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. As introduced, my name is Obed Ogega. I come from the African Academy of Sciences based in Nairobi, Kenya. Working as a programs manager, leading a team that is implementing various programs on science, technology, and innovation across the continent. And when I'm not implementing programs, I'm an adjunct professor of climate science at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. So I'm here to talk about the perspectives of research infrastructures from Africa. And when Ondřej asked me to make this presentation, I reached out to colleagues based in various countries in Africa, asking them some of the hard questions, on interesting questions that Ondřej asked me, and I'll be presenting some of the perspectives from 36 countries in Africa. I had respondents from 36 countries, so it'll be interesting to hear what their thoughts are. So about the Academy, we are a Continental Academy, enjoying the support of the African Union. We're based in Nairobi, but with 5 regional offices. And our vision is really to see transformed lives in Africa through science. Yeah? 3 mandates. The one I'm interested in, because that's where I work, is implementing key science, technology, and innovation programs across the continent. We do this through research grants, think tank functions, among other initiatives. And we have 4 pillars or 4 areas of interest, one of them being building the research and development leadership and environments, the R&D, so the research infrastructures and so on and so forth, making sure that the science that is produced from our scientists get to transition into the market. We do that through supporting the development of an innovation and science-driven entrepreneurial culture, and most importantly, building the critical mass of scientists, the young researchers that are going to continue helping Africa get to where we want to be as envisioned in our Agenda 2063. And lastly, but most importantly, filling critical gaps in research so that our researchers have enabling environments to thrive in the work that they do. And one of the programs that I'm particularly very proud about and happy to present is the ARISE program, African Research Initiative for Scientific Excellence, funded by the European Commission, and we're working together with the African Union, which is essentially creating that critical mass of scientists that I talked about. So currently we are running a pilot program, which is supporting about 45 researchers in 38 countries in Africa. So we give a seed grant of about 500,000 euros for these principal investigators to establish research teams in their institutions as they begin to enhance their research career and ultimately become research leaders in their fields. ARISE is unique in the sense that it's represented in 4 general thematic areas, the first one being public health. We have researchers under green transition, capacities for science and technology, and higher education together with innovation and technologies. Why this is important is we are learning from friends and colleagues from around the world, including Europe. We're trying to see how do we enhance our capacity as Africans in response to our developmental challenges and priorities. And we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. So ARISE, for example, is built on the European Research Council grants, and we have quite a lot that we've learned from our ARC colleagues, and trying to duplicate or do the same for Africa as we build our capacities, both at the national but also at the regional levels. So The responses from 92 friends from across Africa, distributed in 36 countries. In terms of the research infrastructures, you guys enjoy availability and accessibility of these large research infrastructures. They are quite in short supply in Africa, as you may know. And Yule, it's good to hear that you say yes to almost all the requests. I'll be channeling quite a number of them to your way, because one of the challenges that we face, and this is totally understandable when you look at it at the microscopic scale, you guys at your national and sub-regional levels, you have your priorities, you have lots of demand already. Rodrigo talked about lots of requests, proposals that you receive, yet you also get requests from elsewhere, including Africa. And one of the challenges that our researchers are facing are accessibility, obviously because of the competition for space and lab space to enable, you already certify your demand at home before you can even expand to the rest of the world. The other issue that we are facing is funding. I mean, colleagues here have already talked about it. Our kind of funding is the one that would enable us to have a research visit abroad, for instance, to go and conduct research in a lab at one of the core facilities run by Julia. Travel grants are in short supply, and where they are present, they are quite competitive. And what happens in that case, that we have lots of delays in implementation of research projects across the continent, which then ultimately slows down our march towards delivering science that informs policy across the continent. Some of the enablers have been collaborations. I mean, through mentorship or collaborations with researchers from the global north and the global south. Some of this work has actually been possible thanks to those collaborations. And we are always expanding our networks of partners or collaborators from across the world, so that these days, thanks to remote access to facilities, you don't really have to sometimes travel long distances to access some of this. You can be given a node somewhere in a research facility, and then you're able to do your computations remotely. So collaborations are highly appreciated. And then availability of some research grants. I mean, there are quite a few on the continent. They're not as much, but we appreciate the little that we have, calling for additional support to enable our researchers actually get to see this, even as we work as a continent towards establishing our own facilities so that they can take care of the demand at home. So some of the suggestions that we have, we are calling for equitable access. I know lots of facilities are building onto the idea of broad open access, so that even as you, like I said, you look at your own development and research priorities, you are also trying to facilitate access to researchers that would otherwise not have that opportunity. Because we are in this world together. This science affects us. I'm a climate scientist, and through what we call teleconnections or large global climate systems, what's happening in Europe affects what's happening in Africa, everywhere. And for that reason, really, for us to be able to even thrive in the science that we do, collaborations from all parts of the world are quite pertinent. Yeah, so another call, investment. This is mainly focused on our local research institutions, but also national governments, so that currently our governments invest around 0.45% of our GDP in research and development. That is quite low compared to the rest of the world, and we're trying to mobilize our governments to do more and avail funds that can then be used for purchase and procurement of the research infrastructures that we need. But even as we do that, we continue to call on our partners to keep investing in that field. But also, one of the things that we call for is, as the African Academy of Sciences, is to enhance or try to amplify the place of collaborations. The respondents, quite a number of them were saying there is, at least the way it looks from our side, sometimes you write to a collaborator in a research lab somewhere, and some of those emails, quite a number of those emails don't even get responded to. And there seems that there's not enough incentive for collaborators in some of these facilities to actually collaborate with others, researchers in Africa. And we appreciate those that are open and supportive, but we are calling for enhanced amplification of the place of collaboration if we are to move forward as a globe or global community. More or less the same picture for small research infrastructures. They are available, again, thanks to sporadic investments from different quarters. But then some of the challenges we face include bureaucracy, issues around taxation, regulations. I mean, every country has its own ways of doing things, but we are calling, especially at the African Academy of Sciences, for what we call a truly global citizenship. So that if you are going to access a facility somewhere and it's supposed to be facilitating research, you should be given tax rebates or kind of things like that, so that at least accessibility is enhanced. And then our research funding community has most often focused on the research rather than the equipment itself, like Rodrigo mentioned. And we are calling on the international community to do more. Because of these inequities in terms of availability and access of research infrastructures, it would make more sense to invest in some of this equipment so that then the researchers have facilities to conduct this research. Otherwise, the impact that you achieve without that investment is not as much. And we welcome networking opportunities, collaborations. We still want to be part of the global community in the science that we do. So when we knock on your doors as people that have access, please be a little more receptive. We already appreciate the support that we get, but we think we can do more. Yeah. So some of the initiatives that we're doing at the African Academy of Sciences, Africa does not have a synchrotron facility yet. So the African Academy of Sciences, working with the African Union, is already working on the modalities to try and see if we can have one of such facility in Africa. We have partnerships with people like the Association of Biomolecular Resource Facilities, through which institutions that have functioning equipment that they no longer need, maybe because you've upgraded, bought a bigger equipment, that facility can be useful in a university somewhere in Africa or elsewhere. So we are trying to create a platform where donations of equipment like that can happen so that they get to support research in Africa. And I think because of time, I would stop at that for now, and welcome questions as we keep the discussions going. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Obed. It's interesting to see the same keywords, but it seems to me that in Europe we say yes all the time, if technically feasible. In Latin America, you said 50-50, more or less. In Africa, I saw the 15% somewhere on the slide. So I don't know whether it refers to, let's say, the availability of the facilities. So we are seeing different scales, but it's, I would say, the same issues that are being discussed. We move over from environment to medical sciences. Jacques DeMotes is a medical doctor by training. He comes from neurology, and he moved over to run a clinical trials research infrastructure. So over to you, Jacques, to hear your story.
Thank you very much, Ondřej. So I will make a short presentation on the complex. I don't know if I have my slides. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. Previous one. Yeah, on the complex interplay between the local, national, region, and European and global level in terms of support to clinical trials. So the first thing is you have to understand that clinical trials are prospective interventional studies, experiments run in human subject, and the objective of the clinical trials is to compare an active intervention, a new treatment, for instance, with the standard of care. And for this, patients are randomized to receive either the standard of care or the active treatment. And based on this randomization, it's possible to deduce the causality between the treatment and the outcome, and to provide information on the efficacy and safety. Usually the clinical trials are either intended to demonstrate the superiority of the new treatment when compared to the standard of care, or sometimes, and too frequently I would say, just the non-inferiority. Clinical trials is a regulated activity, meaning it's really regulated research, and there are three main players in the field of clinical trials: the patient, the investigator, and the sponsor. So the patients are really the key person because they are the one taking personal risk to participate in clinical trials. And the patient have to provide the informed consent. The role of the investigator is multiple, but in particular, the role of the investigator is first to provide information to the patient, and then the patient provides the informed consent. Once this is established, the investigator investigates the patient, and they collect the data, the trial data based on the study protocol, but they collect also the adverse event data, the vigilance data to detect safety issue and toxicity issues. And then the third player, which is very important, is the sponsor. The sponsor may be an industry sponsor, especially when the objective of the trial is to get the marketing authorization for new product, but the sponsor may be also an academic organization, especially when the objective of the trial is the repurposing of drugs that are already in the market, but to test whether it's possible to extend the indication to new disease. This was typically what happened during the COVID crisis, where many drugs were repurposed to test whether aspirin or chloroquine and so on were active in the... And the third situation where the clinical trials are needed is the situation where treatments that are already authorized and used within the license indication are explored for combination, change in dosage, in duration, and so on, what is called comparative effectiveness research, and this is also sponsored by academic organizations. The role of the sponsor is very important, and especially in Europe, because it is said that in Europe there should be a single sponsor for multinational clinical trials. So if, for instance, the University of Brno wants to be the sponsor of a trial with centers in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, and so on, they have to be compliant with the legislation in these different countries, and this makes the life a bit difficult. And the five main role of the sponsor is to interact with the competent authority, with the National Medicine Agency, to get an approval for the trial, to interact with the ethics committee, to perform the vigilance, meaning to centralize all the adverse event information, to manage the data of the clinical trials that are collected according to the protocol, and to monitor the study. And monitoring the study means that you have to oversee the investigators and to make sure that they comply with the protocol, they comply with the regulation, and that the quality of the data is optimal. So this was the clinical trials in a nutshell. Now we have to go to the infrastructure. There are different levels of infrastructure. The first one is the local level of infrastructure, and here there are two different levels, two different players. The support to investigators, because the investigators are doctors, they work in department, they are very, very busy. Of course, they have access to the patient, but investigation of patient in the context of clinical trial may take hours, because you have to collect a lot of information to perform investigation and so on. So for this reason, these need to have in the hospital, and this is very important to have this in the hospital, you have study nurses and local infrastructure, facilities, equipment, and so on to be able to support the investigator. The second role is the support to the sponsor, and this is done by other organizations called clinical trial unit. And this clinical trial unit work for academic sponsor mostly, but also could be mobilized for trials sponsored by SMEs. Usually the big pharma don't rely on this because they have their own department to manage the clinical trials. What is the role of the clinical trial unit? It can be hosted in the hospital, but also in the university or any research center. They don't have to be in close contact with the patient, because the role is really to manage the trial and to support the sponsor in the trial management task, meaning that they participate in the methodology, the design of the clinical trial. They have expertise in biostatistics, in data management, in vigilance, regulatory, ethics, monitoring, and so on. So they are really the organization managing the trial on behalf of the sponsor. So this is really the local component of this infrastructure. Then at national level, there are also infrastructure. And here again, there is a divide between what is intended to support the investigator versus what is intended to support the sponsor. For the investigators, some countries, and this is the case, for instance, in Czech Republic, have developed disease-specific investigation network, meaning network of investigators working on the same disease, on, for instance, multiple sclerosis or epilepsy or myocardial infarction or diabetes. And these people, instead of competing, work together, they cooperate to establish the network, and together they are able to provide the scientific content, meaning to design the protocol or to address at least the scientific question. Then the protocol can be discussed with the CTU. And this is important for academic organization. And the second thing that is that can be brought by this investigation network is the capacity to access the patient, because they are the head of the department, and they can recruit very fast the patient if they are convinced that the protocol has an interest. And this for the benefit of academic trial, but also for the industry trial. So this is a very important point. And the second one is the network of clinical trial unit. I mentioned in the previous section what are the clinical trial unit. They are the unit able to provide support to the management. So in this case, when you establish national network of clinical trial unit, they can coordinate the management of multi-site, multi-center clinical trials in the country, and they can also exchange best practice and common tools. So we have an example here, for instance, in Czech Republic, the CECRIN, which is the national partner of ECRIN, and CECRIN is based on two different activities. There is a network of 12 clinical trial units that support the sponsor, and there is also a network, 12 network of disease-oriented investigation networks that are able to recruit the patient and to provide the scientific content. Then at European level, here I show you a very simple picture where you can see on the left side the situation for industry-sponsored trial. And you can see in dark blue the multinational trial, and in light blue the national trial. You can see that when the industry is running clinical trials, they always go for multinational clinical trials because this is the most efficient way to rapidly recruit the patient. Except in some countries that you can see in light blue, which is the US, Japan, China, India, Indonesia. Meaning when the population size of the country is big enough, the industry doesn't go for multinational trial. On the right side, you can see the situation for the non-industry sponsored trial, meaning the investigator-initiated trial. And you can see here that most of these trials are run just in one country. And this is very interesting because this is indicative of two problems. The first problem is that the funding is not available most of the time for multinational clinical trials, meaning the funding for clinical trials is just limited to one country. In some cases, cross-border funding is allowed, but this is really the exception. And the second point is that being the sponsor in multinational clinical trials is something very challenging, very difficult, and in most cases, the sponsor, the academic sponsor, avoid to be the sponsor in multinational clinical trials. So this is the reason why ECRIN was created, because ECRIN coordinates the activity of national network of clinical trial unit, and by coordinating this activity, we are able to provide two different sorts of support. The first one is the operational support to multinational clinical trials in Europe, sponsored by SME or sponsored by academia. The services that are provided are based on the coordination of services provided at local level, and this corresponds to the main task of the sponsor, meaning regulatory ethics, monitoring, vigilance, data management. And the second activity, the second line of activity, the development of common tools, common procedure, common methodologies, common partnership for multinational clinical trials. For instance, we have built a database on ethical and regulatory requirement. We have developed a data center certification, data sharing tool, new method for personalized medicine, for platform trials, and so on. So ECRIN is really an infrastructure, pan-European infrastructure based on the contribution of members. We have now 10 members and 2 observer countries, and we are progressively expanding. This represents 360 million inhabitants, so this reaches the critical mass at global level. However, there are some pitfalls and some challenges and limitations. The first one is that we have to consider the subsidiarity principle and avoid the competition with national partners. We, I must say that 12 years ago, we considered building a specific data center for the ECRIN-supported trial in order to ensure the quality of the data management and the compliance with regulation. And when we started discussing this with the national partner, they say, please don't do that, because if you do that, you will compete with us, because we have already in our CTU, in some CTUs at least, we have data centers, and if you compete with us, we will leave the organization. And we say, this is really an important point, and for this reason, we changed our strategy, and we decided to define the criteria, the quality criteria, the compliance with regulation, the compliance with good clinical practice. We had 129 criteria, and we started performing audit to certify the data center. So we, instead of competing with them, we helped them to improve the quality of the data centers. Now we have 17.
Minute, Jacques.
Okay.
Sorry.
We have 17 centers in Europe. And the second thing is the distributed model. Of course, it could be possible to consider that ECRIN, instead of being this yellow part of the picture with 25% working in Paris and 25% working in the different countries, we could have all the staff based in Paris and working from Paris. But by doing this, we would compete also with our national partner, and they would leave the organization. So there is no choice, and in fact, we have to work based on this distributed approach. And this is my last slide. For the global level, and I'm very happy to see that Frédéric Sgar is in the room, because he's the one with whom we work when we drafted the OECD recommendation. We have worked more than 10 years ago to draft the OECD Council recommendation on the governance of clinical trials, and based on this, there was an exchange of letters between the head of OECD and the head of WHO to promote implementation. And we started a program for the implementation of this recommendation called CRIG, Clinical Research Initiative for Global Health. But here we face a lot of challenges. The first one is that the funding is very low, the political will is uncertain, it's never the highest priority. So the only thing we were able to do until now was to exchange tools, exchange the best practice, exchange the certification. For instance, we have certified data centers in Japan and in Korea, but we are not able to provide operational support to global clinical trials, which is a pity, because during the COVID crisis, this is typically what this sort of organization should have been able to bring, but also there is no funding for global clinical trials. And there was, fortunately, last year, after the COVID crisis, the G7 Science decided to draft document to be submitted as a recommendation to the World Health Assembly that was adopted in April, and now there is a document adopted, endorsed by the WHO, and with a new mission to promote the operational support to clinical trials. But this is a very lengthy process. Thank you. Thank you very
Jacques.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we move over to the US, and I say good morning, Professor Willing-Gale. Are you with us? Okay, can we have Luis on the screen? Yeah, perfect. You are still
fantastic.
Still awake, which is perfect. So greetings from 12 o'clock Brno, Czech Republic to the US. Luis is a professor, associate professor of electrical engineering and computer science at the University of Michigan. And she's very much engaged in laser research and laser research infrastructures. So over to you, your 10 minutes, and just a small announcement that to have some discussion, I would keep you in the room even after 12:30 here in Brno for 5 or 10 minutes. So over to the US, the floor is yours, Luis.
All right, I'll try and keep this quick. So I'm going to talk to you today as the Associate Director for the Zeus Laser Facility, which is a mid-scale facility that we're building, and it will be part of the ecosystem of the high-power laser facilities that are available in the US, in Europe, and worldwide. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about the research. So my field of research is high field research, and to create very high electromagnetic fields, we use a laser pulse. So this is just showing a little bit of history about the laser pulse and how various technologies increased our focused intensity over the years. And if we increase the intensity enough, we can ionize material and form a plasma. Plasma, let me see, we use our laser pulse. It interacts with that plasma, it moves the charged particles, this sets up currents and charge separation, which generate electromagnetic fields. So we can create a very dynamic and complex system. And these plasmas support extremely strong field gradients for compact, unique, and ultra short duration particle and photon sources, which can be used to probe plasma physics or for many applications beyond throughout STEM. And we're in a situation now where we can create a relativistic plasma, so we can make the electrons oscillate in the fields of the laser at close to the speed of light. And that's where we set up these unique conditions, but we're just on the threshold of reaching intensities where we'll cross a threshold such that we'll produce many high energy photons, and the photons in the strong field can create pairs, and that changes our energy balance. And so we're very excited about reaching this regime, and many of the facilities are looking to achieve this. So you can see the expansion of the high peak power lasers available in the world. This is from just over a decade ago, and then in the coming the decade that went through, we reached this situation where we have an explosion of laser facilities, particularly in Europe and Asia, and we have many. These star ones are the highest power ones in the world that are available, and so we're growing this ecosystem of high power lasers to do the research, and these range from the smaller to the larger. So on our quest for higher power or intensity, we can go two ways. So the intensity is energy divided by time and area. So we can either increase the energy of the laser pulse, and that would be going to the extremely large scale facility. So these are national laboratory, hundreds of million or billion-dollar facilities, which have very high energy. On the other end of the scale, we have the single PI university-based labs, which primarily use the short duration to increase the intensity and focusing into a small focal spot. So we kind of have these different scale facilities. The single PI university ones would be more of the order of a couple of $1 million, whereas these larger ones are much more expensive. So there are pros and cons to each, and I've tried to summarize these here. So these are, and throughout the talks, there are some strong similarities in the different fields. So in the university labs, these are very straightforward to access. The PI can go directly into their lab and set up whatever experiment that they would like. The facilities can be flexible and agile to the different sites they want to study. They can do hands-on training for students so that students get a full appreciation for the experiments. And we can use these facilities to develop diagnostics and perform proof of principle experiments. The cons are that they get less support, both financial and technical. They can't take on so many technical staff, and this limits the experiments that can be performed and their potential impact. On the other end of the scale, we can have these world-leading in frontier science systems, for example, the highest energy system. These are typically very well funded and have a large staff to support them, and typically larger collaborations come into the facility to bring their science together to perform the experiments. The sort of negative side would be that you have to write proposals for access. You typically get a smaller access, so you get less data overall. The facilities are less flexible unless you go through a lengthy design process to adapt to a different configuration. These can be less flexible. You have to train to be able to run your experiment, and they're not typically hands-on for training graduate students, etc. So this opens up, there can be something in the middle, and taking some pros from the best of both worlds. Mid-scale facilities can be flexible and agile, allowed hands-on training for students. We can develop diagnostics, and they can now be world-leading in frontier science. They get more modestly well supported, but perhaps with more stable funding sources. They might attract reasonable sized collaborations to come and perform the experiments. There are proposals for access, and there might be some training required, but hopefully we can use more of the positive things in these mid-scale facilities. So I'm going to talk about my own facility. Locally, we're building the Zeus facility at the University of Michigan. So we've traditionally had smaller labs, which we've used internally, but now we're facing that we are opening the facility for scientific excellence. There'll be an open proposal based access system where people will be able to come based on the scientific excellence of their research. And so we'll have 3 different target areas to perform the experiments. This is our first user experiment. You can see the sort of size of a typical small collaboration coming in here. We do need a modest amount of technical expertise and staff, though this was mentioned before, staff to run this scale of facility. And these are really key people to the success of the whole facility. We've been working with other people in the US and across the world. This is a new project called X-Lights, and the idea is to bring together people working in extreme light in the intensity, time and space areas. And the idea is to bring together facility users and facility operators to support the science and engineering using extreme light. So it's just been founded, and we're going through the first stages right now. And this is the background. We've got new facilities coming online, and we want to be able to use them to the best of our abilities for the best science, essentially. So how can we bring people together to do this? So the goals of the network are to identify knowledge and technology gaps that can be addressed through collaborative research. So then once we know what they are, can we put forward proposals to international sponsors? We want to promote collaboration from across the global community of extreme light facilities from both the perspective of users and staff. And then we want to broaden engagement, take extreme light applications to neighbouring fields, and to try and bring in more people. The idea is to create a network of networks. So we have on one side the users of the facilities of various scales. So down at the bottom here are some examples of user facilities, and these vary from the more modest. These are all relatively mid-scale or larger facilities down here. some from Europe, some from America and across the world. And so how can we bring, set up a network that connects the facilities and connects their users in an efficient way? So we're hoping the outcomes from this X-Lights project will be a report which identifies science and technology gaps in extreme light that can be addressed collaboratively. The aim is to grow the network of the researchers ready to collaborate, and how can we share knowledge and best practices across the different scales of facility, so we don't have to repeat ourselves or go through the same process that other people. How can we share knowledge about technology, etc., in an efficient way? And then engagement with and proposals to the sponsors of our research to support this collaborative effort. It can sometimes, particularly globally, be difficult to find support on both sides of the ocean to support a project. So I've given a little bit of a whirlwind talk. Hopefully I was within my 10 minutes. The idea is to look at how high power laser facilities research in ecosystem is being built and how can we do this better. So we have on one hand very small systems, on the other hand very large systems, and these mid-scale facilities can bridge the gap nicely, giving these benefits to the research community. And then we've got this network of networks between facilities and users being set up, and we're excited to see where this goes. So that is the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. And now it's time for discussion. I would like to ask all the speakers to join me on the stage. Julia, Rodrigo, Obed, Jacques, and Louise will stay with us. Yes, she is there with us. We can see you on the screen. So you have seen a couple of examples from different continents, from different scientific disciplines. We had life sciences, we had African examples with background in environmental sciences, medicine, clinical research, and we finished with physics, connecting the really big ones, the really small ones, and trying to fill the gap in the middle. So I suggest we spend 10 minutes from the lunch break discussing. I have some 3-4 questions on my tablet from the audience. Is there Patrick still? Yes. You will be able to ask your question on mic. So my first question, and not to all panelists, but a couple of you, especially the microscopists, and also to Jacques. You were speaking about distributed facilities. What is the big facility that you cooperate with? As we heard in the laser examples, is there something in your field or your users interact with you and also some other big facilities? There are mics, so feel free to use them.
Okay. Do I start? Okay, I will say in the microscopy field, we don't have these big centers as you have in the extreme light. We have facilities that maybe, for example, if I put the example of the Cryo-EM, in Sweden, we have set up the big performance machines in 2 places, and we have created a cryo network and a screening network. In the other universities that they are necessary and that they are close, that we can have material, as you said, material for the people, get the samples ready to send it to the big facilities. But this is very special because, of course, Cryo-EM systems are extremely expensive, and that's why you cannot have it all over the country. Even in Sweden, have a lot of money, not enough to keep these machines running. But for other microscopy, the distributed way is actually the best way, and what we do is to have complementary facilities, more than have big and small facilities.
Well, the situation that we have in Brazil, so ideally we should have this distributed network that Julia was mentioning. So that's what we aim to have. The moment that we have like a few centers that now have entry-level infrastructure, so they can produce samples. They, up to a certain point, they can screen them and then go for our center in the case to do like final data collections. And there will be next year another high-end center for Cryo-EM in Rio de Janeiro, new equipments in a large facility. So they are a large facility in terms of electron microscopy too, and they will be starting operating. So that's kind of network we are trying to build.
So for clinical trials, the situation is very simple because the infrastructure has to be distributed just because the patients are distributed. You have to organize the collection of data from the patient where the patients are. So there are some exceptions. For instance, I'm aware of clinical trials using a very unique facility for hadron therapy, and here in this case the patient moved from one country to another one to get treated by the hadron therapy. But this is of course very expensive. You have to pay the hotel stay and so on for the patient. So this cannot be used. The second point is that I mentioned that in our model, which is based on the ECRINERIC funding mechanism, we receive money from member countries to develop the pan-European infrastructure. So in this case, it is not possible to have a single-sided infrastructure managing the clinical trial from one city in Europe. This model exists, for instance, at the EORTC, which is the European Organization for Research on Treatment of Cancer. They are based in Brussels. They have 150 people working to manage clinical trials from Brussels, but probably it's not the best way in terms of cost effectiveness, and they duplicate or they in fact compete with the national partners, which is for us absolutely impossible.
Yeah, thank you, Jacques. And now I give the floor to Patrick for his question.
Yes. Hello, do you hear me? Okay, so I'm Patrick England, working in Institut Pasteur in Paris. So it's a question related to what Jacques presented and to other ERICs that are represented in the audience. So from what you showed, basically an ERIC in Europe, a distributed ERIC, is an integrated network of local units or core facilities. That's what you basically showed in terms of architecture, at least that's what I understood. So the thing is that however inclusive an ERIC can be, of course it cannot integrate all local units or all core facilities. So how does an ERIC work with the local units that are not included in this ERIC, and how do they value their role? What is for an ERIC the role of the core facilities or local units that are not included in the ERIC?
Yeah, I give just a short explanation because before giving floor to Jacques, for those of you not coming from Europe, ERIC stands for European Research Infrastructure Consortium. It's a legal entity that can be established under the European law for providing the legal framework for international research infrastructures. Not only in Europe, there can be also other countries coming in. And basically, I would maybe like to enlarge the question, if you want, maybe Julia, because you mentioned you are part of Eurobioimaging, if you want to comment on that, I would say nearly every scientist in life sciences field has a microscope in his lab or maybe next doors. So how to make sense of all that? Jacques first and then Julia, please.
My answer is linked to the previous one. I think the characteristic of the ERIC is linked to the funding model, meaning that when the S3 was created by the beginning of the 2002, 2003, I think it was not clear whether the funding of the ERIC should come from the central budget of the European Commission or from the combination of national budget. so in case the ERIC would be funded by the central budget of the European Commission, it would be extremely easy for us to be totally inclusive and to cover all the facilities in all the countries. The point is that the decision was made to have the ERIC funded through the combination of national fund, meaning the contribution of national funding bodies result in the funding of an ERIC, but each country can select whether or not they participate and can select also the level of funding, meaning based on the ERIC legal status. So this makes it difficult for us to be more inclusive than we are. Of course, our objective would be to be as inclusive as possible, but due to this limitation, it's difficult to do that, and some countries are not participating. I showed you the picture for ECRIN, so we have only 12 countries on board and 13 with Greece tomorrow, but some countries are missing, and of course the level of funding does not allow us to cover all the expectation and needs of the communities.
Okay, I will open for the discussing and the experience we have from the aerobioimaging and how inclusive or exclusive could be. It is in the hands of the nations, the states, to decide the nodes. How many nodes will be part of the aerobioimaging and apply for that. The example of Sweden, we go with one node, but we actually have 5 facilities distributed over the country. And what do we do with the other facilities are not? Well, some of them are actually, for example, Karolinska Institute, and we are going to do the same with Lund. We have associated facilities that they are to the national node. And those ones could be eventually part of the ERICs. In the aerobioimaging, it's a constant applications every year. This year, UK and I think it was Netherlands, somewhere in Netherlands, and Slovenia have entered. I know that other ERICs are more restricted, and there is not easy to get new facilities, but in the case of aerobioimaging and the way, as you say, there is microscopes everywhere, that means that they have been always an inclusive, and there is always calls every year for the new facilities. But the ones are associated to the nodes there are in the different countries, because who put the money for the facilities is the national countries, is the states. It's not the aerobioimaging, does not give me money. What we do is that we apply into the Horizon Europe projects, where you create these collaboration projects and you have transnational access. And then eventually with the e-remote, the EasyDoor, or one of these projects that they just come up now, it will be money for users to go from one facility to another. But that's just how the aerobioimaging work. We also have the global bioimaging. I cannot talk for other ERICs.
Thank you, Julia. Maybe just one remark from myself, my experience being the S3 implementation group member. And this is, I would say, not a scientific question. This is more administrative, financial, legal question. What's the difference between ERIC and distributed network of research infrastructures? ERIC has a legal entity, can issue invoices, can get funding as a legal entity. Whereas if you have independent facilities in a network, it's great to have it, but there's always an issue of long-term sustainability. For example, not having the legal entity, not having such a powerful central coordination, and there are also other issues. So within S3, there's, let's say, one of the guys putting sort of, not really conditions, but we call it, I think, key, well, it's not key performance indicators, something key, characteristics, that should be the right word, what a distributed infrastructure distinguishes from a network. And I think one really has to go into detail to see what are the differences there. Coming to the next question, I was actually amazed during the presentations that the issues across the board, whether it's different scientific disciplines or different continents, are the same. Number one, it's staff. I would say, because without staff, good training, nothing can be achieved. Number two is funding. So let's shortly discuss these two issues. And I will go over to the US to Luis. You mentioned that, let's say, the big facilities, well, do have sufficient funding, the small ones don't. And the mid-sized ones that you are right now building with the Zeus laser, it seemed to me that they are on the safe side. Did I understand correctly?
I guess it's how they're funded. So the Zeus laser is funded by the National Science Foundation. They've supplied funding to both construct the facility and then operating costs for the 5 years, which gives us some level of stability in terms of recruiting staff and being able to operate within that budget. It's a little bit longer than a typical funding for a single PI experiment might be, so you can have that stability and that core staff taken on. The very large facilities they have to go through their renewal process for their funding as well. But once they have that funding, they can feel pretty stable about operating the facility. Don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. One of the remarks that I see in the online chat is basically just paraphrasing the question: who shall pay the costs for the small and mid-sized facilities? Let's say for the big international facilities, it's sort of obvious that CERN is paid by the member countries. Who shall pay the facilities that are embedded in universities, in research centers? What would be the answer? Julia or Rodrigo or Obed, if you want to pick up the question.
Obed, they have not said anything.
Thank you very much. This is user specific, if you ask me, because in the cases of small research infrastructures in a university setting, I would imagine if I'm bringing a grant to conduct some specific research, I may have to budget for it in my grant or proposal application. But apart from that, institutions should be having operating budgets as well, so that if you know that in your inventory you have X number of machines, then you need to budget for their maintenance and operations. But having said that, some of the challenges that you face is where there's no availability of these resources. Then does that mean that researchers in that particular institution should not do research? In that case, then we look at who else can fill the gap. And as the African Academy of Sciences, we try to mobilize resources and try to provide that equitable access through the facilitation that we do. But ultimately, it's a very important question in terms of who should pay versus who is supposed to be using it at the same time.
Just a few words. If you consider, for instance, the clinical research infrastructure at European level, there are different components: the pan-European component, ECRIN, the national component, and the local one. I think the local one should be paid by the university and hospital, because it's a matter for them to be competitive and attractive for clinical trials, and this generates some revenues, because this also involves some revenues from industry-sponsored clinical trials. At national level, this is paid usually by the government, and this is a case in Czech Republic, where there are grants to fund the national network. And so for the European component, it is paid, it could be paid by European money, by the central budget of the Commission. In fact, it is paid by the contribution of the member state. But if you consider the level of funding, just to give you a few figures, the budget of ECRINERIC is in the range of 6 million per year. Probably the cumulated budget of the underpinning national and local infrastructure is in the range of hundreds of millions. I don't know how many hundreds, but probably between 200 to 500 million. So meaning most of the budget is paid at local level or at national level. And the coordinating body, the ECRIC, is just here to coordinate and make sure that it's possible to cross the border and to have multinational clinical trials run. But without the national component, we would be totally unable to do anything.
I will say that we need a combination of resources of funding. To have a distributed facilities and have clear facilities like we have done in Sweden, in France, in Italy, in Czech Republic is very clear, where you actually efficiently put the instrumentation in a particular centralized place where people can move. These facilities are also quite unique. That's the idea with having, even if they are distributed, they are not redundant. They are quite unique, and unique is also not only the machines or the staff, but also the research environment, and that's what makes special these facilities. You need to get support from the institution that have the core facility. I think that's important, and that gives you a sustainability and relax that you know that you are going to have a budget every year. This is a good reputation from the university or research infrastructure, research institute. And of course you have to have national, because and then you have the possibility to treat every academic in the same way in terms of paying fees. We need to have fees in the facilities as well. The facilities does not have to be for free. They need to have fees. It's very difficult to combine. How that fees can be paid, okay, can be that you pay by hour like you do in a microscope, or as Obed said, you can actually have money that coming from the grants of the PIs. Already, when they apply for the money, they say this particular amount, and I know that there are universities that do in that way, where already there is a certain budget from the PIs and researchers. But I think it has to be a combination, and institutional, national, probably regional, and obviously as well, if we're talking about Europe, a little bit European-centric now, from the European Commission, helping the institutions and the nations to actually work. I don't say probably the same as they do in EMBL or SER, but it would have been great to actually have a bit more help, maybe not to the facility itself, but to the users, because we have noticed, for example, in the eurobioimaging, that one of the main problems is the mobility, and I think we have discussed that now, how we pay. I mean, even if they have the money, they have part of the money, it's very difficult to move the PhD or postdoc and to be 2-3 months sitting in a facility to do the job. Then I think that part can be covered by the international money.
Well, it seems to me that a different business model, different funding model is emerging for the small facilities or mid-scale facilities than for the big facilities. Because, let's say, facilities like the synchrotrons or accelerators or what this type of facilities, they are too costly. No researcher would be able to pay even a fraction of the operating, let alone investment costs. In the smaller scale facilities, the situation is different, and we have to look how they shall be funded. And in my local experience, I know typically you start up the facility for the local scientific community, because you feel the demand and the university or faculty is establishing that. And it's clear in this phase it makes sense to be funded by the university. But when you start opening up, you have other users coming from the national level, international level. There shall be adjustment in terms of funding. And it's always about, life is about choices. So even in the facility business, you need to make choices. What's your ambition? Where you want to go in terms of the, let's say, do you want to be a global stage player? Or do you want to stay maybe on the, just on the local level and serve your local user community?
Just to add something, I'm not like inserted in a university department in Brazil, but like the way it works, it's more or less like you were describing, like it has to be, let's say, an NMR system or an electron microscope. It starts with a project from a researcher. That's what actually pays for the initial investments. Typically, the department or the institution will add some staff to the project, like pay for the person that will operate for that. But still, it is a very challenging situation, because no matter if you pay or not for the use of this kind of equipment, it doesn't cover the costs of operation. There is no way to cover the cost of operation of electron microscope or an NMR, like paying fees. So there still have to be some sort of money coming into the system. And most of the time, if you have needs for maintenance, for instance, the original researcher, the coordinator, has to put another grant or use grants and some money from the institution probably. So it is still a model that, like for, mid and entry-level facilities, I think it's really challenging because it's not self-sustainable in terms of that you can pay for it.
Thank you. We are at the end. So thanks a lot to all the panelists, even the early birds in the US. Thanks a lot, Luis. Next is lunch, and the parallel teams start with the next session at 2 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. So let's see you either here or in the other halls at 2 o'clock, and enjoy your lunch. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.